Okay, let's unpack this. We've got quite a stack of sources in front of us today.
Hmm.
They're centering on some, well, persistent political figures and the legal questions that just keep swirling around them.
Right.
So this deep dive, it's really all about sifting through these materials. We've got articles, expert commentary, notes to pull out the most important nuggets for you.
Yeah, the goal is really to help you get a handle on these sometimes pretty complex situations quickly.
Exactly. Like the serious allegations involving uh, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo.
And also the ongoing scrutiny, it seems, of former FBI Director James Comey.
We'll extract the core insights the sources are highlighting, give you that shortcut to being well-informed without feeling, totally overwhelmed.
Right, and our source material gives us a really specific look here, focusing on perspectives from legal experts and current officials, mainly looking back at past events that are now kind of resurfacing.
Exactly. And the sources, they jump right into a sentiment you hear pretty often these days,
Mm.
a generally low public opinion of politics.
Mm.
And they point to figures like Andrew Cuomo as an example, someone who, despite past issues, the harassment allegations, the COVID response controversies, he just seems to remain a significant presence.
So when our sources talk about Cuomo, what are the core allegations they're really zeroing in on?
Well, the material we have really drills down on the COVID-19 pandemic period. Specifically, the sources state Mr. Cuomo allegedly lied
Lied about what specifically?
about the deaths occurring in nursing homes and also, importantly, about the requirements for moving patients into those facilities.
Okay, and the potential legal side of this. The sources mention something pretty significant there.
They do. They point out that lying to Congress, well, that's a federal crime,
Right.
and the material is specific. These alleged actions happened before Congress.
Wow. And what's striking in the material about these claims, is there a sense of timing?
Yeah, according to a former federal prosecutor cited in our sources, these issues are seen as, quote, nothing new,
Nothing new.
and very overdue for law enforcement to actually look into.
Hmm.
The sources suggest these matters are now being revived
Revived after what?
after allegedly being, quote, abandoned under the Biden administration. That's the perspective presented.
Hmm. And we also get the view of the current mayor in this material, right?
Yes, and they've apparently made it quite clear how they feel about what happened during COVID.
Specifically mentioning.
The disproportionate resources for communities of color, and notably, that nursing home situation.
And their take on the investigation.
The sources quote their view that investigations must, take their course, reflecting a sentiment characterized as due to him for others did to me.
Interesting phrasing. That perspective seems to align with the former federal prosecutor we mentioned.
It does seem to resonate. They reinforce that it's, quote, no surprise this is being revived,
Yeah.
that it's well overdue, and importantly connects it back to the human side. The families impacted deserve justice. So the sources really frame this not just legally but personally too.
Okay, so if these allegations are potentially overdue, happened before Congress, this leads naturally to that whole discussion about timing, right? Especially with elections.
Exactly. The Department of Justice timing. Our sources mention the alleged DOJ policy.
The one about not announcing investigations during campaign season.
That's the one.
Hmm.
But interestingly, they immediately present a counterpoint.
Which is?
Basically, you can't just delay investigating or arresting someone simply because they happen to be running for office. It doesn't work like that, or shouldn't.
And the former federal prosecutor cited in the sources, they weigh in on this policy.
They do, quite sharply. They state that while the policy allegedly exists, it, quote, went out the window previously, specifically referencing how it was applied, or maybe not applied, regarding former President Trump when he was running.
And they use that phrase, don't they? What is good for the goose is good for the gander.
Precisely. The expert's view, according to the sources, is essentially that there's nothing that stops the DOJ from looking into pursuing something further.
Particularly in this Cuomo case.
Yes, which they know was apparently referred for prosecution a long time ago, but never acted on.
So the sources raise the question, could they indict Cuomo soon, like about a month from now, from when the source was written?
They pose that question, but then the material gives an example where they did indict a city mayor much closer to an election.
So precedent exists for acting closer to an election.
Exactly. The expert concludes pretty pointedly in the sources, stating there are, quote, no practical impediments to pursuing criminal charges against Andrew Cuomo if that's what the investigation yields.
And this directly contrasts with that policy.
The one that's supposedly adhered to in some cases, but was abandoned under the prior administration, according to the source.
So the takeaway here, from the experts cited at least, is that election timing based on what the sources show from the past shouldn't really be the barrier here.
Right. But here's where it gets, well, really interesting. Even if timing isn't the main hurdle, the sources dig into the specific legal hurdles. What would it actually take to prosecute a case for lying to Congress, based on the expert's explanation in our sources?
That raises a crucial point about proof, doesn't it? What do you actually need to show?
Well, according to the expert cited, the absolute most important factor for a successful prosecution in these kinds of cases, it boils down to proving the defendant's intent and knowledge.
Intent and knowledge, knowing they were lying.
Precisely. And the sources highlight a specific potential difficulty, or defense perhaps, in the Cuomo situation regarding this.
Which is?
The idea that Cuomo could potentially claim ignorance, say he didn't know about the specifics in the reports put forth on his behalf, try to distance himself from direct knowledge.
Even though the sources also mention seemingly evidence to the contrary showing his direct involvement.
Right, that conflict is noted. But the challenge, as it's presented, remains. If he can successfully argue he lacked direct knowledge of the information now being called lies,
then proving that criminal intent becomes a real problem.
It's a problem to prove the criminal intent, is how the source puts it.
And the expert points out this isn't unique to this case, right? Proving intent is always tough.
Exactly. The expert notes this issue is present in all prosecutions, but they emphasize it can be overcome, obviously, with witness testimony and other evidence.
So it's a hurdle, but not necessarily an insurmountable one.
And what's fascinating here, according to the expert in the sources, is that this very challenge, proving intent and knowledge, is precisely the reason for the investigation.
Ah, so the investigation itself is structured around finding that proof.
That's the idea presented, to see what they can establish to overcome those hurdles.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just theoretical legal stuff. It's framed as the core mission of the investigation right now.
Okay. Shifting gears slightly then, our sources also touch on another figure who, well, seems to remain consistently in the public eye.
The sources use the phrase, won't go away.
Right. That would be James Comey.
Yes. And the sources note his activity, described rather colorfully,
as beach-walking bad-mouthing.
Beach-walking bad-mouthing. The current FBI director, Kash Patel. That's the description used.
Okay. And the sources mention Comey's stated preference regarding FBI decisions.
They do. Apparently, he's more comfortable with D.C. supervisors making decisions.
And the sources imply who he might mean by that.
They suggest figures like Peter Strzok and Baker, noting that none of them are still with the FBI.
Got it. And how does the former federal prosecutor react to these public comments by Comey, according to the sources?
Pretty directly. They call Comey's actions speaking out of turn, to say the least.
Disapproval there.
Definitely. They express disappointment, stating that from someone who held such a high position, you'd expect some sort of professionalism.
And echoing that earlier phrase.
They repeat the idea, Comey certainly won't go away, especially given the public eye on his past conduct and these current issues.
Does the expert suggest this leads anywhere legally?
Not necessarily to criminal charges, this specific behavior anyway, but they state it certainly does put a spotlight on him.
And the sources add one more observation about Comey's focus.
Yeah, almost like a rhetorical question.
Sure.
They observe he just seems obsessed with Trump and now Kash, apparently.
And then they ask,
I don't get it. Think about something else. Why think about Donald Trump? So the sources really characterize this public commentary as, well, notable and maybe a bit puzzling.
Interesting. So pulling this all together, what does it all mean for you, the listener?
Well, we've taken this deep dive into sources covering some really serious allegations against a former governor, Andrew Cuomo, specifically the claim he allegedly lied before Congress about those nursing home deaths and requirements.
We've looked at the expert perspective, suggesting that the timing of investigations, even around elections, might not be the roadblock some assume based on past actions mentioned in the sources.
We've unpacked that key legal hurdle, proving intent and knowledge when someone's accused of lying like this, and why the investigation itself, according to the sources, is aimed squarely at overcoming that specific challenge.
And we've touched on the source's pretty striking commentary regarding the ongoing public activity and statements of a former FBI director, James Comey.
We've really tried to pull out the core facts and the specific insights from the experts cited in all this material, just to give you that crucial shortcut.
Because this type of information, it's pretty essential for understanding how politics, law, and public perception all intersect, often in complex ways.
Yeah. Think about the dynamics at play when actions from the past suddenly resurface during current political cycles.
Or just how critical proving someone's intent can be in these high-profile legal cases.
This deep dive hopefully helps you cut through some of the noise and grasp those essential elements we found in the source material.
So here's a thought maybe for you to mull over, building on what we've discussed from the sources.
How does all this public discussion around the timing of investigations and the kind of public commentary we see from figures like former Director Comey, how does that potentially impact public trust? Trust in both the legal system and maybe the political process itself?